It was an ordinary evening, just like any other, but for Sarah, it was the kind of day that dragged on longer than it should have. She had been working late at the office, staying behind to finish a few last-minute tasks. The clock on her desk ticked louder than usual, marking the passage of each second with a rhythm that seemed to echo in her tired mind. She glanced at her phone and saw a message from her 9-year-old son, Noah, asking if she was coming home soon. The message was brief, but she could feel the quiet sadness in his words. He hated when she had to work late. Sarah smiled softly, but the guilt in her chest was undeniable. Her car hummed steadily as she made her way down the empty streets. It had been a long day, and all Sarah wanted was to get home, curl up on the couch with Noah, and forget about the stresses of work. She imagined him waiting for her by the front door, excited to show her the new drawing he had done or the latest game he had learned. Noah was a bright, energetic boy, full of life and imagination. Every day, he found a new way to make her laugh, even when she was tired and frustrated from her job. The closer she got to home, the more Sarah's heart began to lighten. She turned down the familiar street where their house stood, its lights casting a warm glow in the distance. But as she drove closer, something felt off. The streetlights flickered slightly, and there was an odd quietness in the air. Normally, at this hour, she would see the occasional neighbor walking their dog or hear the sounds of children playing in their yards. But tonight, there was only stillness. Sarah slowed down as she turned into her driveway, her eyes scanning the house. The front door was slightly ajar, just enough to make her uneasy. She knew she had locked it before leaving this morning. A small knot formed in her stomach as she parked the car, but she brushed it off. It was probably nothing. A breeze had probably pushed the door open, or Noah had left it unlocked. But as she stepped out of the car and looked toward the house, a strange feeling crept over her. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine, as if something was not right. It wasn't a feeling she could explain, but it was there, hanging in the air like a warning she couldn't ignore. "Maybe it's just me being paranoid," she muttered under her breath as she walked toward the front door. She reached for the handle and pushed the door open slowly. "Hello," she called out softly. Her voice echoed through the empty house. There was no response. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Normally, she would hear Noah's voice from upstairs, or the sound of the television playing. But tonight, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Her steps felt heavier as she crossed the threshold into the living room, her eyes scanning the space. The soft glow of the lamps made the room feel oddly peaceful, but the silence remained unsettling. She called out again, louder this time. "Noah." Still, there was no response. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she walked toward the stairs. There was no sound from above, no footsteps or giggles. It wasn't like Noah to be this quiet. She felt her heart race as she climbed the stairs. Each step creaked under her weight, making the quietness feel even more pronounced. She reached the top of the stairs and hesitated for a moment, looking down the hallway toward Noah's room. Sarah was a mother who always trusted her instincts, and right now her instincts were screaming at her that something wasn't right. She reached for the doorknob of Noah's room, her breath shallow, her mind racing with questions. She opened the door, expecting to find Noah sitting on his bed, lost in a world of toys or books, just as he usually was. But what she saw instead froze her in place. Noah was sitting on the bed, his small frame hunched over. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, and his clothes were torn and dirty. The soft glow from the lamp above did nothing to ease the tension in the room, but it was the sight of his body that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Her son was covered in bruises. The marks on his arms, his legs, and his face were dark and swollen, standing out against his pale skin like a map of pain. His hands trembled slightly as they clutched at the sheets, but he didn't make a sound. His lips were pressed tightly together, as though he was trying to hold back tears. Sarah felt her heart drop to the floor. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind, but all of them were too overwhelming to process. She moved toward him slowly, not knowing what to say or how to comfort him. Every part of her wanted to rush over and hold him, but she needed to understand what had happened first. "Noah, what happened? Who did this to you?" Her voice was shaky, but she tried to keep it steady. She needed answers. She needed to know that her son was going to be okay. Noah looked up at her, his big brown eyes filled with a fear that broke her heart. "Mom, I didn't do anything. I swear I didn't," he whispered, his voice barely audible. His chest heaved as though he had been holding his breath for too long. Sarah's mind raced. Her son, who had always been so full of life and energy, was now reduced to a frightened child, covered in bruises, trembling in her arms. But as she held him close, she could feel something else. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, something that told her this was only the beginning of something much darker. Her heart began to pound in her chest as she tried to make sense of the situation. She looked down at her son again, her thoughts swirling. What had happened to him while she was away? Who had hurt him? And why? Her thoughts were interrupted as she saw his phone lying on the floor, a text message from her flashing across the screen. It was from Noah's school, a reminder about his recent absence. But it was more than that. It was a notification about the emergency contact that had been listed at the school. A feeling of dread settled over Sarah. Something had happened to her son while she wasn't there to protect him. And now it was up to her to figure out what had caused this tragedy before it was too late. Sarah's hands were trembling as she held Noah close, her mind racing with questions she didn't have answers to. The bruises on his small body were a sight that she couldn't make sense of. The shock was overwhelming, her heart beating loudly in her chest as she struggled to process what she had just seen. Her son, her little boy, was covered in deep dark bruises. She gently stroked his hair, trying to comfort him, but the words stuck in her throat. What had happened? Who could do this to him? "Noah, sweetie, who did this to you?" Her voice cracked, and she felt the tears threatening to spill. She couldn't hold them back. Her child was in pain, and she had no idea why. She needed answers. She needed to know the truth. Noah didn't answer immediately. He just sat there, his body stiff in her arms, as if he was afraid to speak. Sarah felt her heart shatter as she looked at him. He was such a brave boy, always trying to protect her, always making her smile, even when things were tough. But right now, he seemed so small, so fragile. "Please, Noah," Sarah whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Tell me what happened. I'm here for you. I'll help you." Noah looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears that he seemed desperate to hold back. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He bit his lip, trying to keep his emotions in check, but his body trembled violently. He was scared. She could see it in his eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice barely audible. "It wasn't me, Mom," he said, his words thick with fear. "I didn't do anything wrong. I swear." The fear in his voice sent a chill down Sarah's spine. What was he trying to say? Who had hurt him? And why was he so afraid to talk? Sarah pulled him closer, her mind a whirlwind of questions. "Who did this, Noah? You're safe now, I promise. You can tell me. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Noah looked down at the floor, his small hands clutching the edge of the blanket tightly. His body was still trembling, and he could barely look her in the eyes. But after a long silence, he finally spoke again. "Mom, it was someone I know," he whispered, his voice full of guilt and shame. "Someone I trust." Sarah's heart stopped. She pulled back slightly, holding him at arm's length, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean, someone you know?" she asked, her voice shaking. Noah hesitated, looking up at her with tears welling in his eyes. "I didn't want to tell you. I thought you wouldn't believe me. But it was Uncle Mike." Sarah froze. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Uncle Mike, her brother. The man she had trusted, the one who had always been so kind and caring toward Noah. Her mind refused to make sense of what she had just heard. Her breath caught in her throat. She could feel her pulse racing, her heart pounding in her chest. It couldn't be true. No, it had to be some mistake. Mike had always been part of their family, always there for them. How could it be him? How could Noah, her sweet, innocent boy, be telling her something so unimaginable? Noah? Sarah whispered, unable to believe what she was hearing. Are you sure? Noah nodded slowly, tears now streaming down his face. He hurt me, Mom. He said I was bad, that I shouldn't have been so loud. And then he hit me. Sarah's world seemed to tilt sideways. Everything around her felt unreal, like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Mike, her brother, how could this be happening? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She needed to remain calm. She needed to protect Noah and get him the help he so desperately needed. But the emotions swirling inside her, disbelief, anger, fear, were overwhelming. She had trusted Mike with her son's safety. She had never, in a million years, thought that he could do something like this. Why didn't you tell me before, Noah? Sarah asked softly, trying to understand. She gently wiped the tears from his face, her heart breaking for him. You know you can always come to me if someone hurts you. Why didn't you say anything? Noah's eyes filled with guilt. I didn't want you to be mad at me. I didn't want you to hate Uncle Mike. He told me that if I told anyone, they would never believe me. He said it was our secret. He sobbed quietly, his voice breaking. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble. Sarah's heart shattered. She had to fight the overwhelming wave of anger that flooded through her. She had to stay strong. For Noah. He needed her now more than ever. She pulled him into a tight embrace, holding him close as if to shield him from the world. I believe you, Noah, she whispered fiercely. I believe you, and I will make sure nothing like this ever happens again. You're not alone, okay? We'll get through this together. She held him for a long time, rocking him gently back and forth. She knew that they couldn't stay here forever, not like this. Noah needed medical attention, and she needed to call the authorities. But first, she needed to comfort him. She needed to remind him that he was safe now. After a while, Sarah carefully helped Noah to his feet, her mind already racing through the steps she would need to take. First, she needed to make sure Noah was okay. She didn't know the full extent of his injuries, but he had to be checked by a doctor. And then, she needed to call 911. Her hand shook as she reached for her phone. She dialed the emergency number with trembling fingers, feeling as though her whole world was collapsing around her. But she had to be strong. For Noah. The operator answered quickly, and Sarah's voice was steady, despite the panic she felt inside. I need help. My son has been hurt, and I need someone to come immediately. The words felt surreal as she said them. Her son had been hurt. By someone she trusted. By someone she never thought could do such a thing. But Sarah knew that she couldn't allow herself to break down now. She had to act. For Noah. For her little boy, who had just opened his heart and told her the truth. Sarah's hand shook as she gripped her phone tightly, her fingers cold and clammy against the smooth surface of the device. She could feel her heart thudding against her chest, her breath shallow as she dialed the emergency number. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the soft sound of Noah's trembling breaths. He had buried his face in her shoulder, not wanting to look at her or anything else. It was as though he wanted to forget the nightmare that had become his reality. But Sarah couldn't forget. She couldn't turn away from the truth. She had to act. She had to save her son. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before the operator answered. Sarah's voice caught in her throat as she tried to speak, but all she could manage was a shaky breath. Please, I need help. My son has been hurt. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, almost too calm, as though it was trained to handle emergencies like this. But to Sarah, It felt like an ice-cold barrier between her and the help she desperately needed. The operator asked for her location, and Sarah quickly gave her the address, trying to steady her trembling voice. "I'm at 124 Maple Street. Please hurry. My son is badly hurt." The operator assured her that help was on the way and asked if Sarah could stay on the line while the paramedics were dispatched. The words felt like a lifeline, but they also made Sarah's chest tighten with fear. Was Noah going to be okay? What if the paramedics were too late? What if she couldn't protect him in time? She looked down at Noah, who was still pressed against her, his body shuddering with each quiet sob. His little hands were gripping the fabric of her shirt so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. It broke her heart to see him like this, her strong, brave boy, reduced to a frightened child who had been betrayed by someone he trusted. "Noah, sweetheart, I'm right here," she whispered softly, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. She could feel his tiny body shaking in her arms, but he didn't say a word. He didn't want to speak, didn't want to share any more of the horrors that had happened to him. Sarah understood that. She knew how hard it was to open up about something so painful, so terrifying. But she couldn't help but wish he would say something. Anything. She needed to understand what had happened, how it happened, and why. The silence between them felt unbearable. The only sound was the soft, steady rhythm of Sarah's breath, and the occasional sniffle from Noah. She could feel her own tears welling up, but she held them back, not wanting to show Noah that she too was afraid. She couldn't let him see how scared she was. She had to be strong. She had to be the one to hold it together. As she sat there, cradling Noah in her arms, the minutes stretched on endlessly. Each second felt like an hour, each passing moment a painful reminder of how much time had been lost, how much damage had already been done. She couldn't undo the past, but she could do everything in her power to protect him now. She had to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. She would make sure of it. The operator's voice broke through her thoughts. "Ma'am, paramedics are on their way. They should be there in about 5 minutes. Are you able to check on your son's condition? Is he breathing normally? Is there any sign of injury that you can see?" Sarah quickly glanced down at Noah, her mind racing to make sure she didn't overlook anything. She ran her fingers gently over his arms, checking for signs of broken bones or further injury, but his body was stiff, as though he was afraid to move. The bruises on his arms, his legs, and his face were still dark and swollen, but she couldn't tell if he had suffered any internal injuries. She wasn't a doctor, and the uncertainty of not knowing what else might be wrong terrified her. No broken bones, I think," Sarah replied, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't want to say the wrong thing, didn't want to cause more panic than she was already feeling. But he's in pain. He's scared. And he keeps saying it was Uncle Mike. I don't know what happened. There was a pause on the other end of the line before the operator responded. "Ma'am, you're doing the right thing by staying with him. The paramedics will assess his condition once they arrive, and they'll take him to the hospital if necessary. I want you to stay calm and stay with him. He needs you to be strong right now." The words were meant to reassure her, but they did little to quell the storm of fear and panic swirling inside Sarah. Her mind was racing. What if it was too late? What if Noah had suffered more than she realized? She thought about Uncle Mike, about the man she had trusted, and the horrible betrayal that had unfolded right under her nose. How could this happen? How could she not have seen the signs? She squeezed her eyes shut, taking a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She needed to be strong for Noah. That was all that mattered right now. "Stay with me, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice soft as she continued to comfort him. "We're going to be okay. Help is coming. You're safe now." Noah didn't respond, but Sarah could feel his tiny body relax just a little in her arms. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, though his body was still trembling. He wasn't ready to talk, but at least he knew she was there. At least he knew she wouldn't leave him, no matter what. The sound of sirens in the distance reached Sarah's ears, growing louder as they approached. Relief washed over her, but it was fleeting. She knew the hardest part was still ahead. The paramedics would come, they would take Noah to the hospital, and they would examine him. And then the police would come. She would have to tell them everything. Everything about what had happened. Everything about Mike. About the betrayal that had shattered their family. The sirens grew closer and closer, and Sarah could feel her heartbeat quicken. The relief of knowing help was so close was mixed with the dread of what was to come. The questions, the investigations, the truth that would come to light. It was all too much to bear, but she had to face it. For no. When the paramedics finally arrived, Sarah felt a brief wave of comfort. The professionals who had arrived were calm, efficient, and ready to take charge. They moved quickly but carefully, assessing Noah's condition. They asked Sarah a few questions, and she answered them as best as she could, but her mind was still reeling. She wasn't sure what to expect next, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life, and Noah's, would never be the same. They gently helped Noah onto a stretcher and prepared to take him to the ambulance. Sarah stood up, her legs weak from the tension, and followed them out the door. Her heart was heavy with worry, but she knew this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be long, but she wouldn't give up. Not on Noah. Not ever. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft peeping of the machines monitoring Noah's vitals. Sarah sat by his side, holding his hand in both of hers, her heart heavy with worry. She had barely slept since the night the truth came to light, since the moment her world had been torn apart. The paramedics had arrived just in time, but the shock of what had happened to Noah still hadn't fully sunk in. Her mind replayed the events over and over again, each time asking the same question. How had this happened? Noah had been in the hospital for hours now, receiving treatment for his bruises and cuts. The doctors had assured Sarah that, physically, Noah would recover. But it was the emotional scars that terrified her. How would she ever explain what had happened to her sweet boy? How could she make him feel safe again? After what Uncle Mike had done. The police had arrived at the house shortly after the paramedics, and Sarah had given them everything she knew. She had told them about Noah's accusations, about Mike. The officers had been calm and professional, but Sarah had seen the shock in their eyes when she mentioned Mike's name. They'd promised to investigate thoroughly, but the weight of that promise didn't offer much comfort. They were going to look into everything, question Mike, and piece together the truth. But Sarah already knew one thing for sure. Her family would never be the same again. She sat by Noah's side, brushing the hair from his forehead, watching as he slept fitfully. His face was pale, his eyes puffy from crying, but he seemed at peace for the moment. Sarah felt a small flicker of relief in her chest. At least he was getting some rest. At least he wasn't in pain anymore, not physically. But she knew that the hardest part was still to come. The truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. Her mind wandered back to the night she found Noah, covered in bruises, crying, telling her about Uncle Mike. The words still haunted her. Mike had always been there for them. He had been a constant presence in their lives, a loving brother, a doting uncle. It was impossible to believe that the man she trusted, the man she called family, could do something so cruel, so unforgivable. Yet here she was, sitting in a hospital room, watching her son try to heal from the damage Mike had caused. As Sarah sat there, lost in her thoughts, the door to Noah's room opened quietly. A detective stepped inside, his face serious but kind. He was a tall man with a calm demeanor, his dark suit neat and professional. He nodded at Sarah as he entered, his eyes lingering on Noah for a moment before returning to her. "Mrs. Thomas?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. She had been expecting this visit, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. "Yes, that's me. How is he?" Her voice trembled, but she tried to keep it steady. She needed to stay strong. "He's doing as well as can be expected, physically," the detective replied, his voice even but tinged with sympathy. "The doctors are optimistic, But of course, we're more concerned with his emotional well-being." Sarah's heart sank again. She knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Do you have any updates?" she asked, though she wasn't sure if she was ready to hear them. The detective hesitated for a moment before he spoke again. "We've spoken to your brother, Mike. He's denied any involvement in what happened to Noah. He claims nothing unusual happened. He says that Noah must have gotten hurt during an accident." Sarah felt a cold rush of disbelief wash over her. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "An accident?" she repeated, her voice rising. "How could he say that? How could he lie like that?" The detective nodded, his expression somber. "Unfortunately, Mike's story doesn't line up with the evidence. The bruises on Noah's body tell a different story. They're too severe to be the result of a simple accident." He paused, giving Sarah a moment to absorb the information. "We've also found traces of other evidence that suggests Mike was not being truthful. It seems he was at the house that night. The timing matches when Noah was injured." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but she still couldn't fathom the truth. "Are you saying that Mike, that he—" "We believe so, Mrs. Thomas," the detective said gently. "We're gathering more evidence, but we suspect Mike is responsible for what happened to Noah." A wave of nausea washed over Sarah. She felt like she was going to collapse. Her brother, the person she had known and trusted her entire life, was responsible for hurting her son. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she had ever imagined. The detective continued speaking, but Sarah's mind was racing. She couldn't focus on his words. All she could think about was the look on Noah's face when he told her it had been Uncle Mike. She had believed him, but hearing it confirmed was a gut-wrenching reality she wasn't sure she could handle. "Are you sure?" Sarah finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is there any way? Is there any chance it wasn't him?" The detective's face softened. "We've seen enough evidence to know that Mike is lying. The bruises on Noah's body, the marks on his face, the timing of when he was at the house. Everything points to Mike. But we're still investigating. We'll make sure that the full truth comes to light." Sarah's heart felt heavy as she took in his words. The pain of betrayal, of knowing that someone she loved could do something so awful, was overwhelming. But she also felt a sense of relief, a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for justice. As the detective left the room, Sarah sat still, staring at Noah's peaceful face. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would do whatever it took to protect her son, even if that meant facing the hardest truths of all. The truth had come out, but it wasn't over yet. The road to healing, to justice, would be long and difficult. But Sarah was ready to fight for Noah, for his future, and for the chance to rebuild their lives, no matter how broken they felt in this moment. Noah stirred slightly in his sleep, his small hand tightening around hers. Sarah leaned down and kissed his forehead, whispering softly, "We're going to get through this, sweetheart. I promise." And for the first time since that fateful night, Sarah believed it.